Our staple here at the KitchenAid Cooking Theater. You know him as the winner of Bravo's Top Chef Masters. He's also the host of his highly rated, award-winning Mexico, One Plate at a Time. He's also the winner of the Julia Child Foundation Award. Please welcome Chef Rick Bayless.
Thank you. I like being here because I like standing on these wellness mats. That's the whole thing, is that I don't know if you guys have stood on them, but we have them in our test kitchen, and they really do feel like you are standing on some clouds or something, so they're really fun. Come and walk on them. I always know when I come here to the Housewares show that I'm going to be able to stand on these wellness mats, and I'm going to be able to meet all of you as well. When I teach, I always want to teach something that has deep roots in Mexico, so that I can open some doors for you, that you hopefully will be encouraged to travel to Mexico to eat the food that the people there eat, because I know it's really easy to go to Cancun or Cabo San Lucas and eat the food in the hotel, which is all made for people who eat in hotels. And then I try to get you off of the beaten path and get you into an enjoyment of a whole world of cuisine. So I'm gonna make two dishes today. One of them will probably be surprising to you, and one will be much more familiar to you. When my first book came out, which was 30 years ago now, I talked about chilaquiles in that book, and everybody said, "What?" Nobody had heard of chilaquiles before. Now chilaquiles are very popular and people know how to make them, and it's a very classic dish. We all think in the United States it's a dish that's for breakfast or brunchy kind of things, and yes, they do eat it at that time in Mexico, rarely with an egg on it, but because we think of it as a brunchy thing, we always want to put the egg on it. The closer you get to the United States, the more the egg appears. I'm not sure what that means exactly, but in central and southern Mexico, it's typically done with some shredded chicken or some vegetables. Now, it comes from an Aztec word that just means chilies and greens, of all things, greens. So I always sort of like to go back to that and think, oh, I can put a handful of spinach in it or some Swiss chard or something else. Even like in the springtime when the farmers bring us the wild watercress, I take a big handful of the wild watercress and throw that in when I'm making the chilaquiles. But that dish that I'm going to start with today is a pasta dish. And most people think pasta, Mexico, they don't go together. I don't think they eat pasta in Mexico, but they do. And they eat a lot of pasta in Mexico, but it's really just one kind of pasta. It's like an angel hair pasta or a vermicelli. They call it fideos there. And if you go to Spain, you will find them eating that same thing. So this is something that the Spaniards brought, and they treat it in a very specific way, and that's where I'm going to start. And then I'm going to turn it into a dish that you can serve as a typical pasta dish at your house. In Mexico, it would be served as the second course of a formal meal. The first course being a brothy soup with vegetables in it. Second course being what they call sopa seca, or dry soup, meaning that it's cooked in something brothy or it absorbs the broth. Think about the way you cook rice when you put it in. When you put the rice in with the liquid, it looks like a brothy soup, right? And by the time it's finished, it's a sopa seca. It's a dry soup. And the same thing happens with when you're making the pasta dishes. You put them into a lot of water, you take them out, and then you add things to it. So it sort of falls into that same sopa seca category. I'm going to show you the sopa seca version of it. But if you say fideos to most people in Mexico, they think immediately of their grandmother, because grandmother always could make sopa de fideos, or a brothy fideo soup. It is the kids' soup. It has tomatoes in it, and like one of my friends said that the kids always wanted to pretend that they could eat chili, so their grandmother would put a jalapeno into the broth, not cut or anything like that. Just let it bob there and let the kids think that they were eating chili just like the parents were eating chili. But you could cut it up if you wanted to make it, but it's a very simple, homey soup with onions, garlic, tomato, and a little bit of green chili if you want to, and then maybe a handful of cilantro that goes into this pasta soup at the end. I'm going to show you a much more developed version of it, shall we say, a little fancier version of it, but I have to say it is one of my favorite dishes in Mexico, a real specialty of Mexico City. Then we'll move on to making the chilaquiles after that. So, sopa seca de fideos, it's going to start with the angel hair pasta. Now, most times you can buy it like this in a grocery store in these little nests. If you find it coming from Spain, it's usually not in the nest, it's in little pieces about like that. Either one will work. The most important step of making this is the most unusual step, and that is that you take some oil and spritz it over it. I don't know about you, but I'm a huge believer in the spray bottle of oil. I always want that in my kitchen because it allows me to coat things with oil very evenly and without a lot of mess. I can do it super fast. So I've sprayed these now with the oil. You put them into a 350-degree oven and you wait until they're browned all the way through, and they will look like this here, okay? So that'll take you about 7 or 8 to 10 minutes, depending on the exact temperature of your oven. Now, what are you getting when you do that? You're getting a different texture in the pasta. It really changes the texture of the pasta. So when you cook regular pasta, dry or fresh, you can overcook it pretty fast, right? You can't overcook this very fast. And in fact, this is something you can actually cook this dish ahead of time and rewarm it, and there'll still be a bite, that al dente bite to the pasta. Now we're gonna make the sauce that goes into this, and because we live in 2018, we can just go to the store and buy fire roasted tomatoes. When I first started my career in cooking and teaching people how to make traditional Mexican flavors, I had to say, find some really ripe tomatoes and then put them under your broiler and roast them. Well, first of all, finding ripe tomatoes, it's gotten a little bit easier, but it's still hard, especially if you're not in the season where they're growing where you live, okay? Oftentimes they're just those pink warbs from the grocery store that have very, very little flavor and a really weird mealy texture. So when they make the fire roasted tomatoes in a can, they're doing all their processing at the time when the tomatoes are all coming into the season. So we're going to take a couple of cans of these tomatoes and put them into the blender jar. This typically is a sauce that is made with chipotle chilies. And rather than telling you to go buy the dried chipotles to do this with, I always recommend, because I like having them in my refrigerator all the time, is using the dried chipotles that have been reconstituted in a vinegary tomato sauce. So that's called chipotle in adobo, or in adobo, I-N or E-N, depending on whether you're speaking Spanish or English. And these are ready to go. You don't have to soak them to soften them or rehydrate them. And so I'm going to grab a couple of these guys out. I also love having in my pantry the vinegary tomato sauce that goes with these. Now, everybody's probably aware that these are smoke-dried jalapeno chilies. That's the name that it changes to, is chipotle, which comes from the Aztec, just like the chilaquiles comes from the Aztec language. This comes from the Aztec language, meaning smoked chili. And it was the first and foremost smoked chili in Mexico, probably dates back about 3,000 years. That they've been making these chipotles in Mexico. They haven't been putting them in a can with the vinegary tomato sauce for 3,000 years, but that vinegary tomato sauce is super good to have in your pantry, because anytime we want a little smoky heat for anything, and it's also got a little bit of vinegar, salt, and sugar in it. So all of a sudden when you say vinegar, salt, sugar, smoky heat, sounds like spicy barbecue sauce, right? So this is a really good addition. Even if it's just the juice in the can, it's a really good addition to your barbecue sauce. You can even buy open pit and add this to it, and all of your friends will be really amazed, because they say, oh, you made your own barbecue sauce, and you go, yes, I made my own barbecue sauce. Okay, so chipotle chilies go in there. Mexican oregano is our next touch in this dish, and Mexican oregano is not in the Mediterranean oregano family. It's actually in the verbena family. But the Spaniards loved oregano, and 500 years ago when they moved into Mexico, they looked for anything that reminded them of oregano at home. And what they found was this stuff, and now we call it oregano because that's what they called it, but it's really unrelated to Mediterranean oregano. When you buy it in a Mexican grocery store, which is where I really suggest you do it, it will be in whole leaf form. And the reason I suggest you do that is it hasn't gone through the process of what they call cutting and sifting. Cutting and sifting is to make those little tiny uniform little flakes, but that also exposes the leaf to more oxygen and takes some of its flavor away. So when you're using Mexican oregano that's in the whole leaf form, you crush it between your palms, rolling it around and around and around. You will notice that right away you will smell it. It releases all of that aroma. And then whether it's better in the dish or not doesn't really matter, because you get a chance to smell that beautiful stuff. Hold your hands up to your nose and take a really deep whiff. A lot of my cooking actually has to do with the pleasure of the cook in making it, and so that's one of my pleasurable moments. Okay, so we're going to put the top onto this blender now, and I'm going to turn it on and just make a smooth sauce out of it. And pour that into a good size pan here. So you'll notice that I left just a little bit of texture in that. I didn't make it completely smooth. If you make it completely smooth, your friends will all think that you started with a can of tomato sauce, and I never want anybody to think that I have done that. So I'm going to put some chicken broth in here, and we'll talk about our other ingredients that are going to go into it now. And we'll let this come to a simmer. We'll nestle the browned fideos into that and just let them cook in that sauce. So this is a very different approach than what the Italians would do, where they wouldn't toast the dried pasta and then they would cook the pasta in water and then add the other ingredients to it at the end. This is a preparation where you actually cook the fideos directly in this sauce. Now we have some chorizo to use as a garnish for this. So let's talk for just a moment about Mexican chorizo. It is very different than Spanish chorizo. The only reason it's called chorizo is because the Spaniards called it chorizo, but it's not like the cured smoked sausage that they had back in Spain. This is a fresh sausage, and you have to think of it like a breakfast sausage. It has to be thoroughly cooked. And because it has chili in it, now when you think about the Spanish chorizo, you will see that it has a reddish color, but that reddish color doesn't come from chili exactly, because the Spaniards don't like heat. It comes from a type of paprika, and it may be a smoked paprika, delicious stuff, but completely devoid of any heat. Whereas the Mexican chorizo is typically made with guajillo and ancho chilies, or a powder made out of guajillo and ancho chilies. There'll be garlic in there, and depending on where you are in Mexico, the spices could go to the more savory Mexican oregano side or the more sweet cinnamon, cloves, and black pepper. Now, if you go to Oaxaca, which is one of the most famous places for chorizo, you will find those sweet spices, those baking spices. The cinnamon, cloves, and black pepper goes into that mix all the time too. And there they won't use the darker chilies like the anchos. They'll just stick with the guajillo chilies, making it a lighter thing. Now, the one ringer in the making of Mexican chorizo is vinegar. Almost no sausages in the world have vinegar in them. And the reason for that is the fact that it does funny things to the meat. So if you say, I'm going to go to my local Mexican butcher, and he has these beautiful chorizos hanging in the meat section, and I'm going to buy that, and I'm going to grill them like I would a bratwurst or something, you will have struggles because it will start falling apart. First of all, there's a fair amount of moisture in Mexican chorizo, and that vinegar will keep the meat from sticking together. Now you just think about what vinegar does. It's the main kind of, or acid does. The acid is the main component in a ceviche, right? And what it does is to actually cook the exterior of the pieces of fish. I mean, it really does cook it, not with heat, but with acid. And so you get in the ground meat, you get the same thing happening here. So the recommendation always is to cut the casing and take the meat out of it and cook it separately, because you're never going to get it to hold together. We've done all kinds of tests in our restaurant to see if we could get some to hold together a little bit more. And for those of you that are interested in the professional side of things, the use of milk powder can help it to hold together, but it'll never be able to be sliced because that vinegar prohibits that from happening. So you've got this beautiful chili, you've got garlic, you've got spices and herbs, and you've got that touch of vinegar. It makes Mexican chorizo one of the most unique things on the planet. Okay, we've got our sauce now at a simmer. I didn't salt it yet, but I need to go to do that, so I'm going to give it enough salt to make it taste like a sauce, but remembering at the same time that it's going to reduce just a little bit in this cooking period here. But I'm going to give it a little quick taste. Just a touch more. I'm going to add a salty cheese to it at the end, so I don't want it to be too much. Now I will nestle these little guys down in here, and we'll let them cook, and I'll go on to make the chilaquiles while we're letting these guys cook in this broth, or this sauce, I should say. Now, while we're talking about this, I will say that if you've ever read any of my recipes, you will know that I'm a huge fan of a 12-inch skillet. And the heavier, the better. I think having a 12-inch skillet is about the most useful piece of equipment, because anything smaller, the next one down would be 10 inches, you're usually going to have to crowd things in that pan. And so I suggest that you have a 12-inch skillet at easy access in your kitchen at all times. Even if it looks like it's too big, but you have to brown something, it'll brown so much more beautifully if you go through the proper steps. Heat the pan first with nothing in it. Then add a film of oil to the pan, and then add your pieces of whatever that you're going to brown, and keep them separate so that moisture evaporates and they don't just start stewing, okay? So 12-inch skillet is one of my very favorite things to work with, and that's what I'm working with in both of these preparations here. So we're going to come back and we're going to talk about Mexican garnishing cheese and Mexican crema, because those are going to be at the end part of the garnishes for this. So let's move on now to chilaquiles. So chilaquiles are typically in red or green. That's what people will, if you go to a restaurant, they'll say, do you want it red or green? So red will be a tomato sauce, oftentimes very much like that tomato sauce over there, although it would usually have some onions and garlic in it, and oftentimes chipotle chilies, but sometimes it would have a jalapeno chopped up and added to it instead of those chipotles. The green will be the ones that are made from tomatillos. So of course, you can get tomatillos pretty much everywhere, all the way down to the 7-Eleven. I don't know if that's really true or not, but they're everywhere now. And 30 years ago, I could not expect that anyone in the United States outside of major metropolitan areas with large Mexican populations could get fresh tomatillos. And now I'm happy to say they're everywhere because we all know them and love them. We all know how to make salsa verde out of them to put on our tacos. And I think now people are really learning that one of the glories of the world is to make a green enchiladas or green chilaquiles. So let's go through the way that you make those. So the papery husk, of course, comes off. If you go to a Mexican grocery store in Chicago now, and pretty much anywhere, oftentimes they will have these already peeled. Now, tomatillos do not have the same problems with ripeness that a tomato has. So we've already been complaining here about how bad the tomatoes are in the middle of the winter. But you don't complain about the tomatillos because they're picked what's called mature green. And that green is what we want. It brings almost a citrusy acidity to it. Okay, those guys are doing really well. I just turned them over. I'm going to turn it down a little bit now. But you want these to be immature. Do you know this will turn bright yellow when it's really ripe? But we never see that because we don't want them to be ripe. We want them to be mature green. Mature means it's filled out the papery husk. Take that husk off of it, and then you have to cook them if you're going to make this kind of sauce out of them. For me, there's only one way to do that. Most people will tell you, oh, put a pot of water on and boil them in there. But I think that that does not do good things for the flavor of the tomatillo. So we put them under a broiler and roast them for about 7 minutes, 6 or 7 minutes per side. I threw some serrano chilies on this tray. And you want them to be blackened. That is the way that they taste the best. It sounds crazy, but that's the way that they taste the best. So I'm going to scoop these guys now into the blender jar. And you see all that juice that came out of them when they were roasting? That stuff is super sweet, and it will balance against the natural acidity that you find in the tomatillos. So we're going to make a puree out of that guy. Let's see, we'll turn these guys up a little bit over here. So we will turn this on. And now I want to do the same thing with this. I want to blend everything up, but I don't want it to be too fine. So I'm going to leave it with a little bit of texture in it. In my skillet over here, I have some onions that have already been caramelized. Threw in a couple of cloves of garlic at the very end of that caramelizing process. Now we'll add this puree of serrano chilies and tomatillos. And we'll let this come to a simmer again with some chicken broth. Of course, you can make this vegetarian. You can use water for this if you want to. You have to have a good amount of liquid to make your chilaquiles with, but you could just use water. Or if you want it to be richer flavored, then I suggest that you do it with vegetable stock. Okay, so now, while that's coming to a simmer over there, we've got the fideos. Ah, these look super good. So they have soaked up most of the broth, and they've just left that tomato sauce there. And now I'm going to put in here, to enrich it, a little bit of Mexican crema. So Mexican crema is much more closely related to creme fraiche in France than it is to sour cream in the US. It's not nearly as acidic as our sour cream. It doesn't have as many stabilizers in it unless you buy an inexpensive brand of it. And in fact, I have one of those here. A lot of times you will see that it says on the package, it'll say crema mexicana, Mexican style crema. So you think, oh, that's the really authentic stuff. Now you turn it over and you read the ingredients on here. Yes, it starts with a cultured cream product, but then it's got 2 kinds of starch, extra stabilizers in there and stuff like that. Well, basically they're just thickening up some cream. So it won't have the acidity of American sour cream, but it won't have the rich cultured flavor of a really well-made creme fraiche type thing. So either make it yourself. We make 2 varieties of it at our restaurant, one that's stable on hot stuff and one that is not stable, that softens just like regular creme fraiche. For one, we use actually a starter that is a sour cream-like starter, because that's the one that will be stable when we put it on hot stuff. And then we use buttermilk for the starter for the one that is a little richer in flavor, but unstable on anything. So anything warm. So that's kind of what I'm using here is the creme fraiche one because I want it to melt into all of this beautiful stuff here. So we've got that settled. Now we're going to talk about the grating cheese, the garnishing cheeses in the Mexican repertoire of ingredients. So we just came back from one of our staff trips. We do several staff trips where we take all of our management staff, including all the chefs, to Mexico to a different part every year. And we just came back from one that was in northern Baja. So we crossed the border from San Diego down into Tijuana, and we went down to Ensenada. Then we went over into the Valle de Guadalupe, where 90% of the Mexican wine industry is focused. And we went to many wineries, many amazing restaurants. If you haven't thought of exploring that region, it is on fire. And some of the best restaurants in all of Mexico are in that Valle de Guadalupe. And some of the best wineries in the world are in that Valle de Guadalupe. We don't get the wines here. Our restaurants do because we work diligently to get them here to Chicago. So like one of our lists has about 50 of those wines on it. But basically even some of the best Mexican restaurants in the country will have none because they're really hard to get. And they're all made in small quantities. So they don't really need to sell them anywhere outside of Mexico. So they're not going to go through all of the work of getting that stuff across the border for an importer and all that sort of stuff. But we've got some good friends down there, and they have been willing to do that with us. So we have about 10 of the labels there. There are 180 wineries in the Valle de Guadalupe. Just think about that. It's all new stuff. Just a few years ago, 22 years ago, there were 5 boutique wineries. Now there's 180. So it has just exploded. And when we were down there, we had the opportunity to go to a lot of good restaurants and wineries, but then on the way back, we stopped at I think one of the best markets in all of Mexico, and it's in the town of Tijuana. And when you go there, there is Mexico's best cheese store is in that market. So we had the wonderful experience to go with Omar, the owner of it, who's just incredibly passionate through all of his cases and taste all these different cheeses from all over Mexico. And he's got it divided up so that you have all of your garnishing cheeses in this one area. You have all of your melting cheeses in another. You have all of the cheeses that typically go with wine. They're made there in the Valle de Guadalupe area, and that's in a separate case. And then the really aged cheeses that are done at room temperature, he's got those separate. He's got a huge aging cave. I mean, it's just a spectacular place. But when we were tasting through all of these different garnishing cheeses, it was in his mind, they're used in a completely different way. So most of the time you will say to people in the United States, do you like Mexican food? And they go, oh yes, I love it, all that melted cheese. Well, in Mexico, they don't use much melted cheese. A little more in the north part, but in the south, it's not uncommon to not find any melting cheeses in a market, because they're using cheese the way that you would use Parmesan or Romano. They're grating it into dishes to add this boost of umami flavor. And that's what we're going to talk about next. So here we've got I didn't salt this either, so I got to get up to speed here. But we have our broth and tomatillo sauce going on here. Let's see what the flavor of that is after I stir this salt into it. And I'm going to slide the chips in here. So these are fried tortilla chips. Let me finish this dish over here, and then I'll talk to you a little bit more about that. Turning this over to you just to push them down in there. Turn that down just a little bit. So we've got our fideos enriched with a little cream here. I'm going to take one of those garnishing cheeses and sprinkle it over and mix that in too. That's why I was being careful about how much salt I got into it, because all of these garnishing cheeses are going to be salty. here's my bowl to put a portion of it into. And I've got a big meat fork here. So I can do a kind of pretty presentation of this by just simply taking a big meat fork and twirling a portion of it up like that. And I'll set that down there. Set that up. Then our garnishes for this are going to be a little bit more of this garnishing cheese over the top of it. I also have an avocado that I'm going to dice. Now, I like to dice, because these are Hass avocados and have a tough skin, I like to do my dice right up against the tough skin of it and then scoop the pieces out like that. So we'll put our pretty pieces of avocado in and around this guy. I'm going to just spoon one little bit more of the crema over the top of it. And a whole handful of cilantro leaves down and around it, and there you have almost finished. I'll grab the spoon of chorizo, which is sort of the gilding of the beautiful fideo seco dish. And there you've got that one ready to go. Now, let's go over here and be where we left off here. So everybody thinks that if you make your own corn chips, tortilla chips, I should say, at home, they're going to be better, right? I mean, homemade's always better. Not necessarily for chilaquiles. Well, not necessarily in any case. What you buy for tortillas at home are called table tortillas. They're intended to be heated up and used to wrap tacos or serve alongside something, maybe to layer underneath your huevos rancheros, but they're not intended to fry. When you fry them, these are the home-done ones from table tortillas on this side. You will notice they puff up a lot more and they trap more oil. So they're always going to be, they're going to be delicious because they're going to be a little richer on the tongue because they retain more oil. But when you buy tortillas that have already been fried to chips, they're using a different tortilla. And they don't sell those typically in a grocery store. You would have to go to a tortilleria and say you want to buy tortillas for frying to chips. And then they don't bubble so much and they don't retain so much oil. So these are chips on this side that we fried in our restaurant this morning. And they're the ones that are made from the right tortilla for frying. That's the ones that I used over here. Now, you have to decide how you like your chilaquiles. Do you like them to still be crispy or do you like them to be soft like a piece of pasta? And so you make that choice as you're cooking. It doesn't take very long, but when you get everybody seated at the table, that's the moment that you put the chilaquiles in the broth. Don't get ahead of yourself and say, okay, I'm going to make the chilaquiles, and then you're going to call everybody to the table, because they will be completely soft and probably falling apart by the time that you get everybody around the table. So when you get them seated, that's when you add the tortillas, and then you let them go for their 3 or 4 minutes and soften to the point that you like them. I always say, just like pasta, take them off just a step before the texture that you're looking for, and they will continue to soften as they are sitting. Okay, so we've got these finished now. You see how fast that all goes. And I'm going to spoon some of them into this beautiful pig plate. I'm not sure, I'm not trying to say anything by using a pig plate, although I do tend to be a pig when I'm eating chilaquiles, perhaps, be something like that. You might understand that I like carbs because I've done 2 big carb dishes for you today. These are my comfort foods. And I'll tell you, if I ever feel down, all I want to do is eat a plate of chilaquiles. That's somehow one of the most comforting things in the world to me. We'll go back to the same kind of garnish here. We're going to use some Mexican crema, but I'm going to use the one that we do in our restaurant that is set with a sour cream starter so that it will retain its shape on top of something warm like this. By the way, this was 12 ounces. This recipe was made for 12 ounces of tortilla chips. So you can feel free that if you have a good quality tortilla chip available to you, perhaps one that it comes from a local tortilleria where they're frying them, then feel free to just buy a bag of those chips and use them for this. You don't need to be running all over everywhere finding some special tortilla that then you can fry. We're going to put a second kind of garnishing cheese over the top of this one. And then we're going to put some onions. Let's talk about onions. Lots of white onions are used as garnish in Mexico, but always remember to deflame them, as they say in Mexico. Rinse them off. You will rinse off all of that stuff that people find hard to digest, that they find makes them cry. All of that stuff can be rinsed off, and it will give your onions this really beautiful light flavor, not that strong onion flavor. So put that there. And then I've got a big hand of cilantro to put on this. In central Mexico, they love to do chilaquiles with a stronger herb called epazote, and they would cook that epazote right in with everything. Okay, so I've got two dishes here in front of you, two wonderfully strong carb dishes, and they're really bold in flavor, really good stuff. But we need to talk about the two things that will help you to know what to look for when you're buying things in your own grocery store. So we will go back to talking about chorizo to start with. This is a widely distributed brand. It's a brand from Chicago called Supremo. Their standard chorizo is really reliable. So if this is what you can get, feel confident getting it. If you have a local Mexican grocery store and they make their own, feel even more confident getting that. If you want something that is real easy for you to do because you don't have any access to good chorizo, in my last book, The More Mexican Everyday, buy ground pork, you make up this very simple adobo mixture, and you just mix it in and you're done. And then you've got your own chorizo. So 3 options for you that are really available to most people these days. Second thing, we need to talk about Mexican garnishing cheeses. So if you have no access to any kind of Mexican ingredients, choose Romano cheese, because it's very similar to one of the most famous Mexican grating or garnishing cheeses. Okay, Romano would be my first choice. If you could just use Parmesan. If you have Parmesan in your refrigerator, use Parmesan. I mean, it's that same kind of grating garnishing cheese. It's salty and full of flavor. Use it. It'll be delicious. You don't have to be crazy about finding this one thing. What is it?
Muy sabrosa, señor.
I paid him to say that. You know,
I had to. So just to clarify, chorizo is Chinese.
It's Chinese.
Okay? He's been talking about chorizo. I've been hearing it for 45 minutes. The Chinese invented chorizo, but they put a little bit more spice and they charge 4 times more, so well done. Well done.
Well, isn't that the point of life, you know, is to be able to charge more?
I've been trying to charge more for Chinese food. It just doesn't work. And you see all the wonton chips he's done here?
Yeah,
it's fantastic.
He called them wonton chips.
Muy bien. Am I interrupting? I'm so
sorry.
I was just hungry.
Excuse me one second.
Please. Can you give it up to Rick Bayless, who's one of the best Mexican chefs in the world? In the world. Muy bien.
Thank you, thank you.
Ciao.
One thing to say is before I go to questions from all of you about the garnishing cheeses. They're in a category called queso añejo, or aged cheese, and that's what I've been using here. But the most famous one is called cotija, C-O-T-I-J-A, cotija, and most of it is not made in Cotija, the town of Cotija, but it's made in the style of Cotija. So if you see something in your grocery store, you might want to try that out. It may not be very well made. There's a lot of it being made in the US that's really second rate. But there is one thing that is finding its way a lot into the US these days, and it's this thing that's called queso de cincho, C-I-N-C-H-O, queso de cincho. A cincho is like a belt, and it's a woven palm belt. And you can see that belt pattern on the side of this. Now, this version is a commercially made version of queso de cincho, which is typically something that is made in the state of Guerrero on the ranches that have a lot of cattle on them. And it's always coated in the chili. Sometimes they say that's to keep the flies off of it. I think it's to provide flavor to it. But when you taste the queso de cincho, it's high in acid and salt and umami flavors, and I really like this a lot. So look to see if you have a Mexican grocery store near you that has queso de cincho. This is really flooding the market now, and I'm really happy to see that. It's aged for about 3 months by the time that you get it, which may not seem like a long time if you're thinking about Parmesan 18 months or 24 months or whatever, but it's enough to get all that good umami flavor going. Okay, so now we have covered it all. Do you guys have any questions for me about these recipes or not? Yes, sir.
Rick, I was wondering 2 things. Sometimes the tomatillos at the market, some are a little softer and some are very firm. So if I'm going to make a salsa verde, which one do I want? And you're using the Hass avocados today, but I noticed at Frontera you have Mexican, is it Michoacan avocado?
Okay, so 90%, over 90% of all avocados grown in the world are Hass avocados. We bring Hass avocados directly from Michoacan to our restaurant. So everything that we're working with is a Hass avocado grown in Michoacan. And we get them from only one co-op of farmers called Alejandrina. And I think they're the best avocados in the world. And over the years, we've been able to establish this contact so that we can get those avocados shipped to us every week. And we're really thrilled with it. Did you notice when I confidently cut around that avocado and I showed it to you, it was like a perfect avocado? That's the way they come. They're just spectacular. So we love those, but it's a Michoacan Hass avocado. Your first part of your question was about the softness of the tomatillo. Basically, you don't want them to be soft. You want them to be firm. If you feel this, it will give only an slightly underripe tomato. Okay, so it feels like it is not a ripe thing, and that's what you're looking for. So if you feel ones that are a little bit soft, don't go for those. If you see ones that have purple blush on them, and a lot of times in the Mexican grocery stores you will find them, buy them. They're way more complex in their flavor. And they'll sometimes just be called tomate de milpa from the cornfields. They're super good. Other questions? We're going to come to you next, but he's running in the back. We'll take this woman first, and then we'll come up here to you.
We were just wondering, the spray bottle that you use for the oil, is that just a regular spray bottle you buy in any?
No, usually they have to be made to use for oil because oil is so much more viscous than any of the liquids that you would put in it. But you can find them. They're probably littered through this. I'm not going to say anything. I bought mine on Amazon. I don't. But it's a spray bottle for oil. So you just want to see that it's for oil. Yes, sir.
For menu development at Topolobambo, what's your favorite season?
My favorite season for menu development is not the one we're in. Okay, this is the place where we're pulling our hair out. We had our creativity meeting yesterday or a couple days ago, and we went through all of what our local farmers have, and it was like I wanted to jump off the top of the building. It was rutabaga and parsnip and a few shriveled beets. some potatoes, and some fresh stuff that they grow in trays for us, and that was about it. So I don't like that. I actually love that season that's right at the end of August, where you get summer vegetables crashing in with the fall vegetables, because I'm a huge fan of things like butternut squash and all those other kinds of squash. But then I love what the summer gives us, all the beautiful peppers that we get from our local farmers, and of course the different varieties of tomatoes and all of that. But right now, we're at the most desperate moment in our creativity. Yes, one more.
Thank you, Chef. I'm from Vermont. We have to make our own chorizo.
Yeah, okay.
So the question is, can I freeze my chorizo? Or is it better to make it fresh and then cook it fresh?
No, chorizo is actually, when you make your chorizo, if you make that adobo paste that is from my book, my last book, and you mix it in, I like it to set overnight just for the flavors to kind of mingle. At that point, you can freeze the stuff. You can freeze it in small packages. I do that a lot of times at my house because I just, like for making eggs on Sunday morning or something, I just need a little bit, and I just want it to flavor things. And so I'll put a little package of it in my freezer just to pull it out and use for stuff like that. It freezes beautifully. It does. Thank you all so much. You have been a wonderful, wonderful audience. I hope you go home and make fideos and chilaquiles.
Thank you so much, Chef Rick Bayless. Again, while you're here in Chicago, Frontera Grill, Topolobampo, Shoko, you can go to the airport.
You can go to the airport, but don't always come back from the airport, okay? Don't just go to the airport and stay away, okay?
Thank you so much. You can also follow him on Facebook,
Yes,
Chef Rick Bayless, Instagram, Twitter, it's Rick_Bayless, and then rickbayless.com. Of course, folks, stick around. Another one of our favorites at the KitchenAid Cooking Theater, Chef Ming Tsai is going to be joining us. And while we're all taking photos of